Cyberpunk Uncensored.
Hey, what's up everybody? This Cyberpunk Red crash course tutorial is all about doing a skill check. But before I get into how to do a skill check, let me briefly go over a few things about skills. The first thing you're going to notice is in the core Red rulebook, the skills are organized in 9 categories. These 9 categories are basically to help you not only access the skills easier, because instead of having to go through a huge list of skills, you might be able to just kind of jump to a category that you know the skill is associated with and find it much faster. But they're also organized in these categories because sometimes maybe a cybernetic, some cyberware, or a role ability or a drug or something a tech invents or something along those lines might affect a category of skills, not just one particular skill. So anyways, they're organized in these 9 categories for, a few reasons like that. And you can see that they're as such. Awareness skills, which is basically your awareness of your environment and noticing clues and things like that. Your body skills, which involve like physical tasks and feats of strength, endurance and such. Your control skills, which is all about, driving vehicles or maybe riding an animal. Education skills, which is your knowledge and training based on actual education. Your fighting skills, which is like hand-to-hand and melee, not to be confused with ranged weapon skills, which is all about guns and bows and stuff. But also you have your performance skills, which is has to do with musicianship and makeup and stage crafts and things like that. Social skills, which have to do with avoiding social blunders and getting along with people and things like that. Technique skills, not technical. Sometimes I confuse that and I think it is technical, but actually it's technique. But technique skills, which are trained vocational skills and craftsmanship abilities. So those are the 9 categories. Just keep that in mind. The reasoning for that is ease of access and also how some things might influence a category, not just a particular skill. Before I go on to doing a skill check, just another thing I want to mention. When you're looking at the list of skills, and I'm not going to make this crash course 20 minutes long by listing every single skill. There's a huge list there, and I don't need to read them to you. You can obviously just look and see what they're all about. There's a bunch of them. But I do want to get into one more thing before I get into how to do a skill check, and that is when you're looking at that list, notice how each skill is associated with a stat. Now think of your stat. That's your, your dexterity, reflex, intelligence, all that, all your stats. Each skill is associated with a stat. Think of a stat as your natural ability, your baseline ability that's just natural to you. And then your skill is something learned. So when you're looking at that list, notice how each skill is associated with a stat. That's going to come into play when you do a check. And then also notice how some skills, not all, but just some of them, have a parentheses with a ×2 next to it. Those skills are harder to learn, and that ×2 is basically because it's going to cost you 2 times the amount of improvement points, IP, to buy a level of that skill. And I go over that in my improvement points crash course video, so check that out if you want to get into more detail of how IP works and buying skills and all that. But that's what I wanted to mention when you're looking at that list. I just want to point out those couple of things. But let's get into exactly how a skill check works. You're going to see when it's a contested a skill check, it's going to be the attacker's stat plus their associated skill. And so remember I mentioned in the skill list, it's going to have a stat next to each one. So it's that stat plus the associated skill plus 1d10 versus the defender's stat plus associated skill plus 1d10. And remember that sometimes when it's contested, it might not be the same exact skill versus the same skill. Most of the time it is, but sometimes it might be like, maybe a player is trying to be stealthy, and it's going to be versus another character's or NPC's perception, to see them while they're being stealthy. So sometimes it might be one skill versus a completely different skill. That's up to the GM. Just use whatever makes sense. But that's how you do a contested skill check. If it's not contested, you're going to basically take the same format of an attacker's stat plus associated skill plus 1d10, but now it's going to be versus a difficulty value that you're going to see on the DV chart. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute and explain how that works. But before I go there, let me point out a couple things here. When you do your 1d10, if you land on a 1 or a 10, it's considered a critical fail or a critical success. And this is how that works. You take your stat plus your skill plus your 1d10, or in the case of your, and this could be attacker or defender, or in the case of against a difficulty value, it's your stat plus skill plus 1d10, just you as the attacker or whoever is the attacker. But anytime you roll that 1d10, if it lands on a 10, it's considered a critical success, in which case you roll another 1d10 and add that to the total. So man, that can really increase your chances of having a successful skill check. If you roll a 1 on that 1d10, it's considered a critical failure, in which case you roll another 1d10 and you deduct that from the total. And that can really mess you up and make a big difference in that skill check. So that's how a critical success or a critical failure works. It's if you roll a 10 or a 1. And then also remember, if you roll that 1, it's not just a 1d, if you, and you have a poor quality weapon, it's not just another 1d10 subtracted from that skill check, that attack or whatever. It's also going to cause that weapon to jam because it's poor quality, and then you have to use your next action to unjam it and stuff. But anyways, you can learn more about that in my weapons quality crash course video. So check that out if you want to learn more about the different weapon qualities and how that works. But anyways, that's how you do a skill check. Let me show you how the DV chart works. So if it's not contested, you're basically going to have it be the stat plus skill plus 1d10 versus a DV value. And the GM basically is going to set the DV value based on this chart. You can see it. They list the difficulty, the description of that difficulty, and then the DV that you're going to use, that number. And it's everything from something simple, which is like, anyone can do that. Maybe hard for a small child, but anybody can do it. And it's only going to be a DV of 9. Maybe it's something every day. People can do with not a lot of special training. It's going to be a 13. If it's difficult, maybe it's something that's difficult to accomplish, but without training or natural talent. It's just a 15. Professional level, that's when you need some actual training, and you're considered a professional that's skilled in their abilities. And that's when it's a DV of 17. The next thing up is heroic. And that's highly skilled feat, and that's going to be a 21. Incredible is, a tremendous feat, which is a 24. And legendary, which is just how it sounds, something absolutely awe-inspiring. It's just something people write stories about, and that's going to be a 29, you can see. So anyways, that's how the DV chart works. You can read the details of how they explain it. You can take how they title each difficulty level, and then just use that DV, whatever makes sense to you based on what the character is trying to do at that moment. That's how the DV chart works. The last thing I want to mention, and this comes into play, is negative modifiers. If you look in the book, they basically have this little chart here, and they're negative modifier examples. And the reason it says examples is because this is just some of them. As a GM, you can come up with more negative modifiers, maybe even some positive modifiers, But these are the negative modifier examples that they give. And let me just mention a few. And this comes into play when they do the skill check. They might get a -1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Or like I said, maybe you come up with some positive modifiers or something that might help their situation. But in night or low lighting conditions, they get a -1 at that skill check, and that's if they don't have a cyber eye or smart glasses with night vision or something, So now they're trying to perform that task with almost no lighting, in which case they're going to get a -1 on that skill check. Maybe they've never done it before. Again, it's a -1. Maybe it's a really complex task. It's not something simple or easy, It's very complex, involves a couple procedures to the process or whatever, They get a -2 that way. Maybe they don't have the right tools or parts to try to do that task. And again, that's going to be a -2. The other thing to keep in mind is they have, they slept uncomfortable the night before, or maybe they're exhausted. So that's the difference between they slept on the hard ground, maybe out in the street with traffic noise and stuff, and they slept uncomfortable the night before, so they're getting a -2. Or maybe they stayed up all night. They've gone a whole 24 hours, not even sleeping, and they're continuing on to the next gig or something. Now they have a -4 to all skill checks. Maybe they're under extreme stress. Maybe while they're trying to do this skill check, there's super loud noises going on, sirens and stuff, or like the rest of their team is really under fire and there's like lots of bullets flying by and stuff, or someone's attacking them, you know, so they get a -2 because they're under extreme stress. Maybe they're trying to perform the task secretly. Whatever they're doing, they're trying to like pick a lock or fix an item or do some athletics check, like do a flip over something or whatever it is. They're trying to do it, but they're trying to do it secretively. So it's a -4 modifier to that skill check. Maybe the task they're doing is obscured by smoke or darkness, even worse than low lighting. So now it's a -4, not just a -1. So you can see how negative modifiers work. It basically depends on the condition, and then you add that mod value, or I should say you subtract that to the skill check. You take whatever that mod value is and you incorporate that into the skill check. And like I said, this is just examples that they have in the book. You can take into account all kinds of conditions throughout gameplay, and just as a GM, just use your own discretion and use your own creativity to come up with your own mods. And they don't always have to be negative. Maybe there's certain situations that they get a bonus, and it doesn't come from a weapon attachment or some cyberware or something like that. Maybe it's something that has to do with the condition. So that's how it works. That's how you do a skill check. So hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, please give it a like and a share. Make sure you subscribe to Cyberpunk Uncensored on both YouTube and Twitch so you don't miss any of the live streams or Crash Course videos or interviews or any of the Cyberpunk content that we're constantly putting out. So really appreciate you checking it out, and I'll see you next time. Take care.